Is supply management the future of American agriculture? That's the question we're going to dig into in this edition of The Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of The Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Well, hey there. Thanks for joining me for another fantastic episode of The Business of Agriculture. We're talking about something that, let's face it, has been a little bit controversial, gets a lot of people worked up, especially north of the border. I'm talking about the border between the United States and Canada. This is a short little episode, and it's a perfect follow-up to my most recent episode. If you just watched my most recent episode where I got together with Todd Thurman, my business partner in the Business of Ag Success Group, a group you should be a member of if you are an ag professional, Todd and I posed this whole thought about the future, that we've got to bring back margin. We do not have huge margins. In fact, we've gotten so accustomed to, completely accepting of teeny single-digit percentage profit margins in production agriculture, we think it's normal. We accept the fact that in many quarters, you lose money. If you're, say, a dairy producer, a hog producer, a beef producer, you're producing at a loss, with the idea that in another quarter or two, another month or three, sometimes you'll come back and you'll start making that money back. Most businesses don't do this. Most businesses don't accept the fact that they're going to have huge, massive amounts of capital deployed only to then end up having very low return or even a negative return. So I'm talking about this idea as a follow-up to the most recent episode. And I do encourage you to go and listen to that one. You can listen to this one first if you want. But the point is, supply management. If you're saying, Damian, what the hell are you talking about? I'm out here in the equipment business. I don't even know what you're talking about. What the hell is this supply management? North of the border, the United States obviously borders Canada. Canada is a large agricultural nation. They also are a large export nation because they only have 40 million people and they produce enough food for way more than that. So anyway, they have no problem producing food, just like we here in the United States don't. As things go on, if you listen to my stuff, if you've paid attention, been in my audience, production, the ability to make food is not going to be the defining force in agriculture as it has been for the last 100 years. Starting by about the 1960s, certainly by the 70s and 80s, we had the farm crisis in large part because we had huge amounts of supply versus the demand. Now, you have been told your entire life in agriculture, and you've been told this from everybody but me, that we're going to all starve. We got to feed the world, feed the world, feed the world. We're all going to starve. There's going to be 10 billion people on Earth. We're never going to be able to feed these people. We got to make more food between the year 2023 and 2050 than we've made in the last 10,000 years. That is all bullshit. Will we have to make a lot of food? Yes. Do we have more people? Absolutely. Are we going to get to 10 billion people on the planet? No. I don't think we're going to get to 9 billion either, as the United Nations has predicted. If you've listened to my stuff, you understand this. So why am I talking about it now? Well, the reality is population's coming to a screeching halt. Africa is the only continent that has some countries that are really cranking out a lot of babies in general. Almost all of the Americas, North and South America, is below the threshold for replacement rate. It takes 2.1 babies per female to stay at replacement rate, meaning to keep the herd the same number. We're nowhere close to that. United States, we're about 1.63, 1.65. We've been at a below replacement rate for a very long time. This is happening in many parts of the world. There's only like 12 countries out of the 200 countries on the planet that have rapidly ascending population growth, and none of them are big population countries. India right now is about stable. China's losing population. So I've talked about this previously. Why am I telling you now when I talk about supply management? Because we have had the concept, the idea, it's been given to us, indoctrinated into us, that we have to make more food, we're all going to starve. Well, what if we know that production continues to just do amazing things? My friends at Extreme Ag, they're talking about huge yields with lesser and lesser amounts of crop inputs per bushel produced. We're getting way good at this in places like the United States, Canada, Western Europe even. So what if we continue to climb? Right now we get about 1.7 to 1.9 more bushels per acre per year as our trend line on corn. 90 million acres of corn in the United States of America every year on trend. Not every year guaranteed, because if there's a little bit of a drought or something like this. But the trend line is we've been getting just about 2 more bushels per acre of corn on the trend line for the last 50 years. Okay? About 1 more bushel of soybeans per acre per year on the trend line. Again, not every year, but on the trend line. So we keep getting more bushels per acre. And those are just the big 2 crops. Could say the same thing about dairy, pork. We're getting more piglets per sow. We're getting more pounds per pig. We're getting more pounds of gain per pound of grain fed. The environmental crackpots that talk about how bad beef is for the environment. A lot of that is bunk. We're making more pounds of beef per calorie given to the cow, to the steer, to the feedlot animal than we ever have. So the reality is our production is amazing. Our production is efficient. Our production is not going to be the concern. The idea about food scarcity, like we've always lived by, I talked about it in my book, Food Fear, we're not there anymore. So if this is the case, and we continue to get even better, and our intensiveness of agriculture continues to intensify, meaning our good ground, let's call it Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, you know what I'm talking about, not the stuff that requires huge amounts of drilled water. If we have some of those acres that come out of production, as I've predicted, if you have to drain out the Ogallala Aquifer to get your crops to grow in the panhandle of Texas, you're probably not going to be growing corn in the future, and maybe you never should have been when we can grow corn without irrigation in Ohio. You get my point here. So some of those acres are going to shift, and they already have. But what if my predictions are accurate, that food production continues to get even better? What about global warming? Well, the truth is, in Indiana, where I live, we get a little bit more rain, and we're a little bit warmer than we were 120 years ago. That's pretty damn good for crop production. So what I'm saying is, what if we have this situation, as I think we're going to have, where production continues to just keep ramping up, especially on our good ground? What'll happen is some of the lesser ground that requires a tremendous amount of inputs, a tremendous amount of piped in, pumped water that gets paltry yields, that ground's going to shift off. It'll go to a different use, maybe from corn to grain sorghum or corn to grazing property, whatever. But is that even going to be enough to offset the rapid gains? Probably not. So if that's the case, if that is the case, as I think it very well may be, maybe not next year, maybe 3 years, maybe 10, maybe even 20. But if you're a young person listening to this podcast, 10 years will blow by like you can't imagine. So in 10 years, what if we say, yeah, we've already factored out some of our lesser ground. You see, we still have 14 or 15 billion bushels of corn, or 4.5 billion bushels of soybeans. And if the trend line stays, it'll be 5.5, 6.5. Remember, just in the 1980s, we grew like 1/3 as much corn and soybeans as we do now. So we invented reasons to get rid of the massive supply that we have. 35 to 37% of our corn goes to ethanol. Now, it doesn't go there and die. Some of that comes back as dried distiller grains and byproducts after they've extracted the ethanol out of it, and it goes to animal feed. But the point is, we're manufacturing demand for about 1/3, a little more than 1/3 of our corn crop in the way of ethanol requirements through the renewable fuel standard. We're going to probably see something similar to that on soybeans with the push for renewable diesel. But if we continue this other push that the government is pushing, electric vehicles do not need ethanol, nor do they need renewable diesel. So we're going to continue to make more corn and more soy if the trend line stays as it has for 100 years of growth of both of those, and particularly in the last 50 years. We're going to have a huge pile of grain. And you're saying, oh, well, Damian, we got to feed the world. Okay, great. We've shipped as much as we can over to, say, Africa. But the people in Uganda only can buy so much. They don't have any money. Secondly, Brazil's trying to supply them as well. So is Argentina. So is Australia, mostly in wheat. But where I'm going with this is, in places like the United States, what if we start looking at ways to reduce grain inventories or reduce grain production, because we're just so damn good at making it that there's no money in it. And we're already arguably there. I think it was the year 2020, 30% of America's farm gate revenue was government payments. This is not an uncommon phenomenon. Right now, things are very good at the farm. They were even better in 2022, 2021, record years. But about 2019, 2018, 2020, you could look at any of those years and roughly like 20 to 35% of the farm revenue came through government payments. This is something that has existed, if you look historically, for the last 40 or so years. What we did in the 80s was to reduce supply. We invented a thing called the CRP program, Conservation Reserve Program. Essentially, you can take some of your acres and get paid for a 10 or 15-year plan. They now have a 30-year plan if it's near a river. 10 or 15 years has been the standard. You remove it from production. You cannot grow something that has an agricultural value that you sell. You can put trees on it, or prairie grass, or clovers and pollinator programs, whatever. But the reality is to take ground out of production to reduce supply and also to enhance the environment. It has done all of those things. So about 23 million American acres, and I'm talking about United States of America, not North America. United States of America, I'm not sure what happens up in Canada in terms of conservation programs, but I can tell you that essentially was a government way to reduce supply. And it kind of then propped up prices. When you reduce supply and demand stays constant, prices go up. But what if that's not enough? 23 million cropland acres converted to CRP. It tends to take the worst ground out of production. You don't take your best prime stuff and stick it into prairie grass. You take your crappier stuff, like I did, and put it into wetlands and prairie grass and tree plantings. That's not enough to reduce the supply. So 10 years from now, we're sitting in this situation where our trend line keeps going up. We keep making more and more and more stuff. And we just start to realize, oh, all these populations aren't growing. And as people age, they eat less. Remember, an 18-year-old eats a hell of a lot more than an 80-year-old. We're going to start having more 80-year-old types than we're going to have 18-year-old types. So what if supply management is the answer? And you're saying, Damian, I'm still not sure I understand what supply management is. Well, that's why you tune into the business of agriculture, because I can help you understand it. While we're here, I also want to remind you of something. I want to remind you that if you want to maximize profits on your farm property, beyond just selling commodities and producing what you produce on your farm, do you know you can get paid for what we'll call environmental programs? We'll call it ecosystem marketing. Truterra, Truterra, Truterra.com is where you should go to start this process. Essentially, you can go in there and take a soil health analysis, and you can talk about what's going on in your farm. Are you using cover crops? Are you reducing your tillage? You might be eligible to then get paid, get money for just changing some of your practices, or maybe not even changing your practices. Perhaps you're already there and you can get money. All of a sudden you have a new revenue stream beyond just what you produce on your farm. You also now get this. So if you're a landowner, you should inquire. If you are a farmer, you should look into this. Truterra.com/enroll is where you want to go. Truterra.com. You can probably be making money on your acres to supplement your farm revenue. Extra revenue sources. Don't you like making money? I do. Okay. So speaking of money, there's going to be less and less margin, let's say, if we continue to have such vast amounts of supply. And I'm looking forward. And I'm telling you that this has been the trend for a while. Remember the 80s, 37 years ago, invented the CRP program to take acres out. So we're going to continue to maybe see some of that. Environmentalists will push more government purchases, or shall we say government CRP contracts to take some more land out. But will that still alleviate the supply problems? I don't think that it will. So then we talk about supply management. If you're saying, Damian, now explain this to me, I will. North of the border in Canada, they have supply management, or the quota system, particularly in dairy and poultry. Not so much on the other stuff. No, not canola. But years ago, and I would like a Canadian to hop in on here and tell me about anything that I'm getting wrong, but I'm pretty familiar because I've worked in Canada quite a bit with agricultural organizations. If you want to milk cows and you want to milk 1,000 cows, you can. But you may not be able to sell the milk. You see, the quota system was set up by the dairymen, using this as an example, where it's like, okay, you get so much quota. And it's kind of this quasi-relationship between the producers and then the government sort of oversees it. And it makes it so that then you have a stable price because you're only producing as much supply as the country demands and as whatever exports and processing and cheese and fluid milk requires. So the idea is you get this quota that you had, that Grandpa had, to milk up to 80 cows. And basically, it's not by the cow, it's by the kilograms. It's by the output. In the United States, it would be by the pounds. So if the guy that milks cows, that rents my field behind my office right here, he grows alfalfa and he milks cows, and he gets 83.5 or 84 pounds of milk per cow per day. Then he has a certain amount of that he can sell. So the idea is there's a quota system on how much you're allowed to take to the processor. If you get much over that, then all of a sudden you're dumping it or trying to share it with your neighbor or something like that. So you can milk all the cows you want, but you're only allowed so much to actually go to the processor, or as the Canadians call it, processor. I call it processor. Canadians call it processor. But they also call that place you live a house. What the hell do they know? I love Canadians, by the way, just joking. So here's the deal. What if we then extrapolate the supply management, the quota system, to everything? It happens for poultry, it happens for eggs, and it happens for milk north of the border. What if we did that here? You're saying, Damian, what would that do for us? Well, it fixes supply and therefore fixes the price at a certain level, because assuming that demand remains constant, you're going to have then demand right here and you're going to have supply right there. So it essentially keeps supply right there at demand, and you can then have a more guaranteed price. You can actually build in bigger margins. Dairy and poultry is a more profitable endeavor in Canada than it is in the United States of America in general, because you have a built-in cushion or built-in price, if you will. What if we extrapolate that to everything? Right now, my friend Todd Thurman, my business partner with the Business of Ag Success Group, will tell you he's got clients in the hog industry, millions and millions of dollars deployed for their integrated, vertically integrated hog systems, and they're averaging about 4 to 5% returns. So my question to you is, if you had $10 million invested in an agricultural operation, would you be satisfied with 4 or 5% return? You know, you can take your money and put it into a money market account at Smith Barney, Morgan Stanley, I guess it is now, and get 4.5%, 4.2%. Why would you then take that money, put it into hog facilities, manage a bunch of employees, have the environmental issue, the liability issue, to only make that kind of return? So what I'm saying is, what if the industry itself pushes for supply management? Because they say we would rather have double-digit returns, double-digit percentage margins versus single digits. It's not necessarily bad for producers. In fact, it's quite good, because you're building in a more livable wage. Remember that? How the people on the left always are crying for livable wages? That's where we might go with this. Now imagine it's corn and soybean. The one thing that's bad about supply management is that it tends to limit your ability to expand. Okay, if you want to milk more cows and sell more milk, you need to own that quota, which means you might go to the guy down the road who's getting ready to retire, and they milk 100 cows, and you say, you know what, I want to increase my herd by 100. I'm going to buy your cows. I'm also going to buy your quota, and now I have the right to sell it. So what people struggle with is that mean that that cow is worth like $30,000. Not really, not going to the sale barn, but meaning the ability to sell the product of that cow makes it a $30,000 or something like that, $40,000, whatever it should be. What if it becomes that way then with acres? If we limit supply and we have supply management, the National Corn Growers Association gets together with the checkoff program and the corn people, and then they say, you know what, let's have the government help us manage this. We're going to make it so we never make more than 14 billion bushels of corn in the United States, because let's face it, for God's sakes, we're going to have this problem where it's going to be so much we can't get rid of it. Okay, and what's that mean? Well, you're a farmer in Indiana, Damian, and you have 100 acres of corn basis through the United States Department of Agriculture. So on those 100 acres, you're allowed to do the national average or the Indiana average or your county average, and that's what you're allowed to sell. If you grow anything more than that, you better find something to feed it to. So will this happen? I truly believe that it might. I truly believe that supply management is probably where we're going to go, because once you get to where you have all the commodity stuff satisfied, go back and listen to Todd and I's episode about building margins back in. Once you have the commodities covered, and then you figure out all the new ways to use your commodity, say ethanol, and then you figure out new ways to take some of those corn acres and put them into Indian corn, sweet corn, popcorn, non-GMO corn, corn for corn chips that are sold at Whole Foods that meet a certain sort of tracing. Once you go through all of that and you say, yep, we still have a boatload of stuff, of commodity corn, beans, wheat, barley, whatever that thing should be. And now we got these farmers out here that are basically breaking even, and the only profit they have is if we have a USDA program. Now, that was always good. USDA, in large part, has kept a lot of farm belt operators above break even. It means that we have a steady food supply. It means we have food security. That's the entire gist of the USDA since the 1860s, when it was signed into law and we created the Department of Agriculture, was for food security, food stability, food safety. What if we already have those things met? What if that becomes a moot point? Then do we say, all right, but we want to keep it profitable? Because in many ways, you can look at production agriculture and it's been anything but ravingly profitable. Supply management, and I'm not calling for this, I am with about 58% accuracy. How did I come up with 58? Because Jack Lambert's picture's right over there and his number was 58. Also because I think it's more than a half and half likelihood. I believe it's more than a half and half likelihood. What we've usually done to protect margins is we have limited imports, said you're not allowed to put your stuff here. We're not going to take any French soybeans. We're not going to take any Brazilian beef, whatever that should be. But what if the future is we can't just limit it by imports? We've got so much stuff. Then we say, all right. And what if the producers themselves say, you know what, we would actually go for supply management? And I've heard some of these whispers. I've heard it in dairy, because the Canadian system looks pretty darn good to a dairy operator in the United States who is producing milk right now that's costing them about $19 to $20 per 100 weight to produce. That's the real number here on July when I'm recording this, about $19 to $20 per 100 weight to produce, and it's being sold for about $15 to $16. How many days you want to go out and milk those cows to lose $3 per 100 weight? So supply management has its benefits. It also then has its certain detriments. It tends to, shall we say, fix forces of economics, much like a minimum wage tries to dictate something that is not an economic equation. Wages should be based on what the supply and demand and willingness of labor is, but we have a thing called minimum wage. We had a thing years ago called the loan deficiency payment, LDP, through the USDA. What it really was not a loan at all. It was the federal government fixing the price, putting a price floor on commodities. The real price of corn might have been $1.60, but you could get $2.02 through the USDA program because it thought you needed to make that to justify farming and actually keep your head above water. So we've done this before. So it seeks to defy economics, but it also does it in a different way. It incentivizes you to stay at a certain level of production. One thing that I believe happens when you have supply management, it also stymies innovation. Once you have built-in margins and you can only produce so much, what's your incentive to go out and get really damn good at it? Well, you still could get better at it. You could be more efficient, but are you really, really swinging for the fences? I believe supply management might stymie some innovation. It does limit some expansion opportunities. You could even say that it might prop up some lesser efficient producers at the expense of some better producers. Those are some of the arguments against it. But I'm about 58% accurate. When old Damian's in his 70s, maybe even before then, you're going to say, you know what, that guy got me thinking on the Business of Agriculture podcast, episode number 302. Damian got me thinking about something I had never thought about before. He actually got me thinking that what about when supply is so vast and all this whole commodity mindset goes away, this idea that we're never going to have enough food, we're all going to starve, when we start to realize that somehow that's yesterday's thinking, wow, we want to make it so that my son and daughter can be in this business, but there ain't no money in this business, which has always been a struggle. 1970s, things were good for about 6 years. 1980s was a crash. I can go back historically and tell you when things were good and when things got tight. This is not a new phenomenon. What if there becomes a push? Let's limit supply. You know what else limiting supply would do? It would reduce waste. And that's another reason why I think this is going to catch. It's going to be the economic reason. It's going to be the environmental reason, because right now we have so much glaring amount of waste. About 1/3 of everything we produce globally gets wasted. We're not immune to it here in the United States. Here in the United States, we waste a lot of what we produce. Not like in third world countries. It doesn't rot in the fields. It doesn't get blown over by a typhoon or a bridge gets knocked out and we can't truck the stuff from one part of the world to the other. It's not that so much. It's post-harvest typically here. But all of a sudden, if you didn't have so much vast amounts of supply and it was a little bit more valuable because we controlled it, it would reduce waste. So I think the environmental reasons and the economic reasons might be a reason that you will see supply management discussions moving forward in agriculture. I'm Damian Mason. I'm throwing this out there. I don't mind if you disagree. I don't mind if you want to send me a note telling me your thoughts, because I think this is the reason I invented this podcast 6.5 years ago, is to throw out ideas or discussions or thoughts that I have. Because the way it worked for me is after I hung up with Todd on our last discussion about low margins and how we can cure that and how we should review and rethink the way we do things in production agriculture here in North America, it dawned on me, I went over and wrote it on my whiteboard, is supply management our future in American agriculture? How would it work? You could look at the Canadian system. There's other systems. There's other quota systems. I've talked about it in the Netherlands in terms of dairy, but there's other issues going on right there. And again, those are environmental pushes. So are we going to see this? The economics might justify it. The environmental movement might justify it. To be seen. I believe in the future there'll be bigger pushes for supply management. I'm not saying that I want it. I'm just telling you what I see happening because I keep paying attention, and I hope you do too. Thanks for being here. This is a discussion to be continued. How's that? Till next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason, and this is the Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You know, everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, Pattern Ag can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.